Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much to the organizers for including our paper on the program. This is a joint work with Jason Lee and Jigao He. And this paper is motivated by our observation that many new many modern, I think this is the issue. Oh, no, it works. Okay. So this paper is motivated by our observation, well, a while ago, because it took us a while to develop it, that many new blockchains are actually built on the protocol that is called Byzantine fault tolerant. So we have realized after a while that even though Nakamoto's consensus and Nakamoto's blockchain is a great invention, and it allows us to achieve certain level of immutability and reliability in a decentralized system. It's true that there are also some downsides like electricity consumption, and there have been new types of blockchains being developed. But as soon as we step away from proof of work, all those blockchains rely on some form of Byzantine fault tolerant mechanism. So now, Ethereum 2.0, Tendermill, and now DM is kind of defunct, but you can replace it with Cosmos and a number of other proof of stake, delegated proof of stake, permissioned blockchains. They all use Byzantine fault tolerant protocol. So now, the reason why it's kind of interesting is that Byzantine fault tolerant protocols go back to the classic problem of the Byzantine generals problem, back to the 80s and 90s. And in fact, we have been seeing the deployment of distributed databases that have been using with great success Byzantine fault tolerant protocols and Byzantine fault tolerant consensus since that time. Okay, so we have seen them all along, but now we are seeing a resurgence of interest in Byzantine fault tolerant protocols with the rise of blockchains. And there is a big difference between Byzantine fault tolerant protocols in distributed databases, the classic ones, and Byzantine fault tolerant protocols in blockchains. And this is because the adversarial environment has changed between those two applications. So in traditional distributed databases, as they are deployed in any internet company, every time you are dealing with data that is not fitting in one server, you need to have distributed database, and most likely you're using a consensus mechanism that is built on Byzantine fault tolerance scheme. Now, all those deployments of those distributed databases are happening within a particular company. So we have all the nodes in this distributed system within a particular company. So the nodes may be hijacked by a hacker. The nodes may be failing due to technical reasons. But the ones that are working properly, they will just follow the protocol that is prescribed. So yes, there is adversary, the hacker, but the honest nodes are the honest nodes. Now, when we move from distributed databases to blockchains, the nature of those honest nodes changes. Now, we cannot rely on the fact that nodes will just follow the protocol because we prescribe them to. The nodes are individual decision makers that are individually optimizing and maximizing their chaos. So they will decide whether they want to follow the protocol or not, and they will not follow the protocol if it's not profitable for them. So aside of the fact that we have nodes that may fail, they may be hijacked, they may behave in an arbitrary manner, we also need to worry about all the properly working nodes, which we call non-Byzantine, that we need to worry whether they will want to follow the protocol. And this creates a problem in design with the protocols, because which type of protocols? We need to design protocols that will be incentive compatible with those nodes that will properly work. And it turns out that not all Byzantine fault tolerant protocols in the classic sense of distributed databases are incentive compatible and are applicable to blockchains. Okay? So obviously, we do worry about, and there is work considering individually rational and payoff optimizing nodes in validating, and we are worrying whether they will want to double spend, they will want to outrun, they will want to follow the protocol or not. But we are taking a very deep look at the actual Byzantine generals problem. So very often when we talk about consensus mechanism, and when we're talking about nodes in a distributed system, in blockchain, achieving consensus, and whether proof of work is going to be susceptible to double spending, or whether proof of stake is going to be internet compatible, you have probably heard many times when we say that the nodes will vote. And if we get a majority of nodes to vote on something, then we're going to get this as consensus. Well, so how do you think voting is happening in a distributed system? Where is the voting booth? Because the moment that we have a voting booth, we just centralize the system. So there is no one place to collect the votes. The systems, the nodes are sending individual messages to each other, and they may be sending those messages, different messages to different nodes. So when I'm a node, and I am receiving some messages from other nodes, and let's say I get 90% of the messages saying, well, it's black, I vote for black. I don't know whether the next node is not getting messages from the same node saying 90% it's white. Right? We don't have the voting booth, and we don't have anyone tallying the votes, and we don't have anyone broadcasting what the voting outcome is. Okay? So in such a case, how are we achieving consensus, and how are we accounting for the incentives in the system? Okay? So I would like to kind of go back to what the Byzantine generals problem is, because we keep throwing around the term, but very often not adequately. So the Byzantine general problem goes back to the paper by Lamperts and Shostak back in the late 80s, mid 80s. And basically the story goes, suppose that we have this Byzantine general that is besieging the city and has lieutenants, and he needs to send a message to all the lieutenants that we are going to attack the city at 4 a.m. and needs to make sure that all the lieutenants are going to get the same message, because everybody needs to attack at the same time. But as the messengers are running around with the messages can be intercepted. Some of those participants may be traitors, or they may just fail and run out of, be lost on the way. So in this case, when will the lieutenants go and actually attack? Because they will have sufficient certainty that other lieutenants will attack at the same time, because nobody wants to be the only one to attack, because the attack will fail. Okay, so this is the Byzantine general. Byzantine general is not the traitor. So then we want to have protocols that are Byzantine fault tolerant, right? And then we kind of shorten it, and then we say that Byzantine nodes are the nodes that are the traitors. So kind of like goes. Not exactly the same way, but the idea about Byzantine general's problem is about communication, and it kind of gets lost on the way when we're talking about nodes voting for a certain outcome. So the way we interpret it from the economics perspective, because what we want to do in this paper is to say, let's take this changing adversarial environment and let's put economic lens on it, and let's ask how is it going to affect the efficiency and the performance of the systems in equilibrium. So in the classic Byzantine fault-tolerant protocols, we have Byzantine nodes that are behaving arbitrarily. The classic Byzantine fault-tolerant protocol assumes that the nodes that are non-Byzantine will just follow honestly the strategy. But what is really important is that every node has just local information. Nobody knows what is the global state of the system. So in this paper, we are going to say, well, we can't just assume that everybody is going to follow the protocol because we prescribe them to. They are rational, meaning that they are maximizing their utility within the system. Byzantine nodes are also rational. They may be just as well rational, but we just don't know what type of objective they have and what they are maximizing. This is why we're going to assume they behave arbitrarily. And since they may behave arbitrarily, then our rational nodes are going to be ambiguity averse about the Byzantine strategies. They're just going to assume the worst case scenario. They're going to assume worst of the Byzantine strategies. Okay, so in this environment, we are using a simple game to conduct our equilibrium analysis, and we call it consensus game to start with. So we have continuum of computer nodes of measure n, and those nodes are playing this consensus game. They want to achieve consensus, and it follows in a couple of steps. So first, nature randomly is choosing a leader. So we have a leader, and then all the other computers or the other nodes are considered backups. Then leader decides for each backup whether to send a message. And this could be the new batch of transactions on the blockchain. Then each of those backups is deciding if they receive the message, they can decide to forward the message to other nodes. Okay? Now, what is important is they cannot forward the message that they have not received. Nobody can fake a message because we have pretty good signatures. It's symmetric key encryption. So it's really clear if you got the message, you are forwarding the legitimate message. Okay? But now what is really important is that as we have those messages being sent around, and this is the information about the new batch of transactions that is happening on the blockchain, each of those computers, there's no one blockchain, the blockchain. The blockchain sits individually in the local copies of those computers, and then everybody needs to update individually their own local copies, and they want to update it and make sure that all the other rational nodes updated it exactly the same way. So if in my local ledger somebody owns a Bitcoin, when they will want to spend it, and I'm going to confirm this transaction, then everybody else is going to accept my my transaction in my block. Okay, so they want to, so then each node decides whether to commit the message, means write it in their local ledger based on its local information set. Okay, so at which point we're going to know that everybody else knows what we know. Okay, this is the problem. So we have two types of nodes. The measure f out of the n nodes is Byzantine, who may take arbitrary actions. Okay, and we need to account for it. The issue is that we don't know which ones are Byzantine. If we knew which ones are Byzantine, we just exclude them, and that would be easy. Okay. Another thing is that we are going to, because we want to look at the rational nodes as payoff maximizing, we need to assign utilities to to different actions. So for the rational nodes who maximize utilities, they are going to receive, if they commit to a message, and they receive a reward R, if there is consensus on this message. So everybody else also committed a message, but they receive penalty if the consensus fails. And how do we define consensus? Consensus is if almost all, so measure n minus f of rational nodes commits. So we want to make sure that all the rational nodes basically are on the same page. Okay, so this way we get a dynamic game with imperfect information. It has flavor, is both coordination and cheap talk. It is not exactly cheap talk because you can only commit a message if you ever got the message. Whereas in cheap talk games, you can take the action, the coordination action, even if you never exchange the messages or you never got the messages. So there are some limitation, but the flavor is kind of the same. Okay. So what we are going to use here as solution concept is perfect Bayesian equilibrium, and we're going to use the multipliers over Byzantine strategies because of the ambiguity aversion that we are going to employ here. So we are, the contribution of our paper is to characterize the Byzantine fault-tolerant blockchain protocols in the context of the economic model. so that we can later get additional insights and find implications, the first thing that we do is to characterize all symmetric equilibria. Start with symmetric equilibria, but at least we get all symmetric equilibria. Okay? And to do that, we start with a candidate symmetric equilibrium. So we need to have some probability P with which rational leader sends a message, probability Q with which a rational backup node is forwarding message to all the other backups. And then we need to define a strategy for committing. So how many messages does the backup node need to have in order to commit the message? Because if I only get one, that may be enough or may not be enough, okay? And this strategy will depend on whether they are getting messages from the leader or not. May depend. So, what we will find quickly that it's a coordination game. So we always get this kind of null equilibrium. We can always get an equilibrium where we never reach any consensus, kind of a stalemate or gridlock equilibrium where nobody ever commits, and then doesn't matter how many messages you get because you know that nobody else commits, you're not going to commit. But we are interested in conditions where we can actually get some consensus equilibrium. So messages get sent and we get some equilibrium. Okay? So each backup node, whenever they receive a number of messages and they know that, let's say we're in a candidate equilibrium is characterized by P and Q, probabilities that the messages were sent and forwarded, every backup node can make certain inferences from the number of messages that they get. So the first inference is that they can make, the first inference they make is about the leader. Is the leader rational or the leader is Byzantine? This is a crucial part. And what is happening is that for a given equilibrium, candidate equilibrium P and Q, if the leader is rational, we know how many messages we are going to get. Because if the leader is rational and sent to everyone the message with probability P, and then all n minus f backup nodes forwarded it with probability Q, then at least we are going to get n minus f times PQ messages, even if all the Byzantine backup nodes do nothing, they don't forward. And then, even if the other extreme is if all the Byzantine backup nodes forward with probability 1, they shouldn't be doing it. They follow protocol, they would be forwarding with probability Q. But if they follow with probability 1, then we are going to get n minus f PQ plus FP messages. So anything within that range is consistent with leader being rational, and Byzantine backup nodes doing whatever when they get the message from rational leader. Now, if we get number of messages that is outside of this interval, we know for sure that the leader is Byzantine. Okay? Within that interval, we cannot say. So the leader may be rational. This interval is consistent with leader being rational, but the Byzantine leader may send us just as many messages. So we can't tell. Okay. But it's already some inference. The other inference that every backup node can make is about the number of messages that other backup nodes have received. Okay? And the number of messages that that can be received in any PQ equilibrium at most is n minus f q plus f. So if all the backup nodes are forwarding messages with probability q, then we cannot get all n messages unless q is equal to 1. Right? And this is because even if everybody gets the message and the backup nodes are forwarding it with probability less than 1, then there's only that many messages as we can get. Okay, but we can get any messages in between. So now what turns out is that for whatever number of messages that I get, I know that if the leader is Byzantine, all the other nodes can get minus f messages than my number or plus f messages than my number. okay? But not, and of course, limited by zero and the maximum. And this is because if the leader is Byzantine, the Byzantine nodes can coordinate with all among each other, and they can deliver any number between this -f and +f. And the -f and +f is, well, what is the number of the messages that I got is the number that the Byzantine leader sent to rational nodes, and I got it all from rational nodes. And all the Byzantine nodes are sending their messages to some other rational nodes. So the other rational nodes can get the messages that I get plus F messages from the Byzantine nodes. Oh, what if I am getting all the messages from the Byzantine nodes, and those Byzantine backup nodes are not sending those messages to the next rational node. So I'm getting to this other rational node that is getting F less messages than me. And this is why it's plus or minus F. However, the rational nodes, whatever is the number of rational of messages that I got from other rational nodes, is the same for me and other rational nodes. So it's only the Byzantine variable that is changed. Okay, so with those two inferences, the rational nodes are kind of trying to make a decision whether to commit. So we also need to account for the ambiguity aversion about the Byzantine strategies. So rational nodes know that Byzantine strategies can do whatever. So as they are thinking about their payoffs, they're going to take the worst case scenario. They're going to always think of the Byzantine strategy that is going to give them the least payoff. So formally, rational node, whatever the information set it has, and this will be the information set is the number of messages that they get. They are going to look at the Byzantine strategy consistent with this information set that is giving them least utility, right? And then they will try to choose a strategy that is going to maximize this worst case scenario. So that in particular means that if they're given the number of messages that I got, if there exists one strategy for Byzantine nodes who can coordinate such that there's a positive mass of other rational nodes that are not going to commit to message, then my best response is not to commit. And this is going to help us to characterize the best response in the equity. So we are going to first characterize region where rational nodes will never want to commit, okay, by elimination of iterated elimination of dominated strategies. Okay, so first, let's think of a situation where rational node is getting F messages. If rational node is getting F or slightly F than messages, slightly less than F messages, then he knows that there may be some positive mass of rational nodes that are not getting any messages at all, because they are getting, everybody else is getting -F or +F messages, anywhere in between, and maybe positive mass. Well, if there's positive mass of backup nodes that are not getting any messages, they cannot commit, no matter what. If they cannot commit, my best response is not to commit, so I'm not going to commit. Now, let's think about 2F. If I got 2F messages, then I know that there may be positive mass of users who just got F messages or below, because it's -F, so they are not going to commit. They're not going to commit, I'm not going to commit. And you can iterate it. And what is kind of interesting is that unless P is equal to 1, we're always going to have this interval consistent with rational leader that is less than F. So whenever we are just on the other side of the interval, we are not going to commit because we are thinking that there is a positive, there's some possibility that the positive mass of users, positive mass of nodes here is not going to commit, and therefore we're not going to commit. And if we go further, again, we know that the leader is Byzantine, and we're not going to commit. So we're definitely not going to commit in those intervals where we know the leader is Byzantine. Where how about the interval where the leader may be rational or Byzantine? If we would know that the leader is Byzantine, we wouldn't commit. But maybe we want to commit if the leader is rational. So what we are first finding is that either we are going to commit in the whole interval, or we are going to not commit in the whole interval. We cannot have a situation where we are committing in one spot and not committing in another spot. Because if we had this as a kind of our commitment strategy, then the Byzantine, even though the leader may be rational, the Byzantine backup nodes can always make it possible that I get the number of messages on the green dot, and all the other rational nodes are getting the number of messages on the, or positive mass is getting the number of messages on the red dot, and the consensus is not achieved. So I would lose if I would commit. So I'm not going to commit, okay? Because it's going to be positive mass, and I'm not going to commit. So therefore, we either commit or not commit on the whole interval. What does it depend whether we are going to commit or not? Are we going to have this equilibrium that where we can commit? Well, it depends on the payoffs, on the reward and on the penalty in the system, and on the probability that the leader is Byzantine or rational and natural. So we derive those conditions. And what we find is that, of course, the non-consensus equilibria always exist, but otherwise we have two types of equilibria with consensus. One is an equilibrium that we call unitary P equilibrium, and this is where the leader sends the message with probability 1. And all the users all the rational backups are committing if they get messages within the interval consistent with the rational leader, provided that this condition on payoff is satisfied. This condition is kind of in a straightforward way coming from the expected utility, right? With probability n minus f, with probability n minus f over n, the leader is rational, and I'm going to get rewards from consensus. With probability f over n, the leader is Byzantine, and I'm going to get penalty from committing. So if the expected payoff from committing is higher than from not committing, and the penalty, then I'm going to commit. This is the most straightforward equilibrium, and this is equilibrium that is consistent with what the traditional Byzantine fault tolerant protocol is prescribing. Now we also have other equilibria, and those are what we call fractional P equilibria. And those are equilibria where the leader sends a message with some lower probability, and the backups are committing when they receive a message within the number of messages within the interval consistent with rational leader, but adjusted to this strategy. Now, what is interesting is that we get those equilibria under much stringent condition on the payoffs. The reward for consensus need to be higher, or penalty for committing under no consensus needs to be lower. And what is another thing that is important is that this interval of the possible interval on P is somewhere around 1/2, and it's on both sides of 1/2, but it's not going all the way to 1. So we might have an equilibrium where the leader is sending messages always, or we may have an equilibrium where the leader is sending messages somewhere around 1/2, plus or minus something. But we're not going to have an equilibrium, for example, where the leader is sending messages with 0.999 probability. Okay? And how much time do I have?
10 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to say a couple of words why. So the reason why we don't have this probability of 0.999 as possible equilibrium is because when rational nodes are getting messages, they may be getting a message from the leader, or they may not be getting a message. They may be not getting a message from the leader, even though leader is rational. If rational leader always sends a message, then if I'm not getting a message from the leader, I'm not going to commit, and that's easy. But now I need to evaluate whether I'm going to commit if I didn't get the message. And now if I didn't get the message, there is probability that leader is rational, and I'm just in the 1 minus p draw, or the leader is Byzantine and is not sending me a message. If I'm getting a message, then I need to evaluate the probability p that I'm getting a message from the leader, or the probability that I'm getting a message from the Byzantine leader. Okay, so if and those probabilities are different. If I received a message from the leader, then the expected payoff is depending on this p from committing. But if I did not receive the message from the leader, then I get this minus p. Now, if the p is really, really high, then there will be, but not quite 1, there will be positive mass of rational nodes that are not getting a message, even though leader is rational. But they say this is such a small probability that leader is rational and I didn't get a message, so I'm just not going to commit. And if this is possible, then even though there's a bunch of rational nodes who got the message from the leader, they say, well, the payoffs are not high enough to make those hesitating rational nodes commit, so therefore I'm not going to commit. So this is why if the probability that leader is sending message is really, really high, but not quite 1, we need to have really huge rewards for the for consensus to be reached in equilibrium. Okay, so they both need to be positive, and this is why we are getting this interval around 1/2. If p is equal to 1/2, this is when it is easiest to satisfy those conditions, and we need to have those stringent conditions. Now, this is the fact that we are not going to get an equilibrium with leader sending a message with probability 99%, where it's much more difficult to get this equilibrium, and under stringent, like really huge payoffs. This actually matters when we account for message loss. So we may have those messages occasionally get lost. Now, if those messages occasionally get lost, we no longer can rely on the fact that I got my message from the leader as really the crucial point in me committing. And in fact, what we are finding is that if we account for some probability that message is lost and they are delivered only with alpha less than 1, then this unitary p equilibrium no longer exists. The only equilibrium we are left with are those fractional p equilibria, and then we need to choose the probability for the probability to in equilibrium, the probability that the leader sends a message needs to be somewhere, needs to be defined by this condition with alpha. So again, it needs to be this interval between around 1/2, but this is alpha times p. So the probability that I can receive a message, whether due to loss or due to leader not sending a message. Now, the consequence of it is that if we're in an environment where a message can be lost, we need to set up a protocol that is going to encourage the leader to send a message with lower probability to the nodes. So this is counterintuitive. We want typically the leader to be sending the messages, and the messages are lost. Then maybe we should be striking even more to send those messages with higher probability by the leader to compensate. But this is not the case. Once the nodes start to believing that maybe there are some other nodes who never got the message and from the leader and got the message otherwise, and they may not want to commit. That means that it is better to have a lower probability of sending a message and having more of those nodes not getting the message from the leader, so they are not inferring it as a negative signal. In order to achieve the consensus. Okay. So we also look at the case of systematic message loss. where there may be a good state where all the messages are being delivered, or some other probability bad state where messages are getting lost with probability alpha. And there we find that those equilibria look quite differently. So depending on what is the environment, the prescription of the protocol that we need that is going to be followed in equilibrium will be very different. And it's not going to be always the same protocol that will be incentive compatible. And what is also important is that the payoffs are playing a huge role in whether we're going to get consensus or not. Okay, so why does it matter? Why does it matter? In a sense, this seems to be kind of such a technicality underlying this almost bolting rule in communication of the nodes. But as we are seeing proliferation of different blockchain designs, and some of them are being more successful than others, and some of them are failing, and some of them are susceptible to attacks and problems with consensus. We are kind of aware that the operational success of any blockchain depends on its design. And if we are going to account for incentive in Byzantine fault tolerant consensus, which is underlying all of the blockchains that are not in some flavor, all of the blockchains that are not proof of work, then we need to be aware that all of those designs are subject to multiple equilibria, and we may want to have a device how to select this equilibrium, a good equilibrium. There is really a huge importance of information imperfection in this system, and it needs to be accounted for. And really, even small probability of message loss may significantly affect equilibria. Now, in order to compensate for that, the protocols we need to be designed being with awareness that the payoffs really are going to affect whether equilibrium is going to exist and whether it's going to be robust to those perturbations. So we may say that maybe those payoffs may be restricted by environment, but probably more often they can be the decision in some respect of a system designer. And this should be incorporated in the design of the system. Okay, so I won't have time. I just have 1 minute. So this is why I left it for last. It relates to a work, to existing work on Byzantine fault tolerant and on incentives in achieving consensus. However, what we are doing is we are looking at the importance of information imperfection rather than operational costs of the blockchains. And this is an intrinsic challenge faced by distributed system that is not going to go away even if we have more efficient networks. So we provide this economic framework to analyze incentives, and supposedly is going to help us design better blockchains so that we can run more efficient DeFi schemes on those blockchains as they're being more efficient. Thank you.